Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick overview on the difference between wills and trusts. Okay, so I get a lot of these questions about estate planning. What should I do? Is a will better for me? Is a trust better for me? Hopefully this video will help. So first key difference between a will and a trust. Well, I tell you what, let me step back 1 second. So what are they? What's estate planning? A will and a trust just tell the world how you want your estate, how you want your assets distributed, and to whom, and when. So we call that estate planning, saying, like, listen, after you pass away, somebody's got to deal with your car and your house and your business and all the stuff in your house and your money. Where do you want it to go? And how do you want it distributed? So that's what a will and a trust will do at kind of your, highest level. So the difference between the two really centers around the probate process. So probate or probate court is the body that governs your estate after you pass away. So in Ohio anyway, if you don't have a will or if you do have a will, in either of those two scenarios, if you need to transfer assets, well, not you because you'd be dead, but if your executor or your administrator needs to transfer assets after you pass away, they're going to have to do that through the probate court. If you have a trust, your trustee does not need to do that through the probate court. So that's probably the biggest key difference. With a will, you need to go through the probate process. With a trust, you do not. So, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but I think for our purposes, that's the key difference for those two items. Now, why does that matter? Well, first is cost. So your will typically is going to be less expensive to get created or drafted by an attorney, and your trust is going to be more expensive. So you've got that upfront cost difference. And the costs are going to vary just depending on who's doing what and where you're getting it from. But in a nutshell, the trust is going to be more expensive up front. However, because you have to go through that probate process with a will, you're going to incur attorney fees or costs once that probate is open through the probate process. That, in my experience, is generally you're going to spend more money in attorney fees and costs on through the probate process than you would if you just had a trust put together. So ultimately, the will could end up costing more money. Now that may not matter to you because, like I said, if we're using your will, if we're going through probate, it's because you're dead, but your estate's going to pay for it. And for some people, they don't want that. That can be frustrating because they want to set their beneficiaries up in a good way rather than having them pay these costs, to go through the probate process. So ultimately, I think the trust can be less expensive. Now, number two with the probate process is time, right? So typical estate in Ohio, at least where I'm at, is going to run, it's going to take 12 months to 18 months from the date you open that estate with the court until the actual distributions are made and the estate is closed. So, sometimes that can be frustrating where you've got beneficiaries waiting a year to a year and a half to get the distributions. So, with a trust, usually it's a lot faster. Within 30 to 45 days, we've got assets transferred over. We've got, distributions are flowing. Of course, depending upon what the trust says, but it's a much faster process. Another thing about probate is it's a public record. So what does that mean? That means anybody can go down to the probate court and start looking through records and find out, when somebody passed away, who their beneficiaries were, what their addresses were, what assets were transferred to them, the value of those assets. So it's a public record, and that can be something that some folks want to avoid. Whereas the trust is it's a private document. So it's not part of the public record. If you don't have to open a probate estate, then there's nothing for people to go down to the probate court and look at, and your transfers under your trust can be pretty private. So that's a pretty big benefit. So where else does a trust, I think, kind of outrank the will? Well, in some scenarios, a will might be a good fit. So if you have a super simple estate, not a lot of assets, not a lot of beneficiaries, everybody, your children or all your beneficiaries are grown up, so you're not worried about, dumping a bunch of assets on them at a young age, then a will can be great, right? So like I said, if it's a simple process, you still got to go through the probate process, but it at least is pretty simplistic, and a will can be right for a lot of people. Maybe everything goes to your spouse, everything's split between your 2 adult children, or everything goes to a charity, right? So pretty basic, and that may work. If your life's a little bit more complex, maybe you have minor children, right? So you have young children under the age of 18, maybe you have a beneficiary with a disability, or maybe just, as you kind of go through life, you recognize that your children or your beneficiaries struggle with money, right? They can't manage money. They're constantly in bankruptcy or being chased down by creditors. Maybe they struggle with, they can't stay out of jail. Maybe they have significant drug habits. Maybe they can't keep a job. Things like that, where you realize that dumping a bunch of money on them or giving them control of money is not going to end well. So trust is a great tool to use in that type of scenario. It really just allows you to kind of like stagger or plan your giving in a way that may make sense. Allows you to take care of your beneficiaries, but give them distributions of money or assets as time progresses and as they mature. I mean, I think of if I would have got a bunch of inheritance at the age of 18, I probably would have been a disaster. And I think a lot of kids are like that. So there's some benefit into pushing those distributions off until you're 25, 30, 35, 40, that kind of thing. So a trust allows you to do that. If you have minor children and you just put a will together, then Ohio does allow you to postpone distributions until they turn 21, maybe even up into the age of 25. There's a custodial account that needs to be set up and some language that needs to be in your will. So it's an option. I don't think it's a great option. Like I said, I think if you're going to do some sort of planned giving or staggered distributions, I would go with the trust. I think that's the better move here. If you don't have a will, then everything inheritance goes to your children at the age of 18. So, even though you've got a few other planning options with a will, the trust gives you just, I think, a lot more options to deal with that. And finally, I think if you own significant assets, and it's a number that matters, or you own businesses, or you own rentals. Those are things where I start to look at trust as again a good option that we can kind of streamline your planning so that you don't end up passing away and you've got an estate that's a disaster. I mean, I ran into an estate a number of years ago where the person had passed away and they owned numerous businesses and rental real estate and just a bunch of assets. And I mean, it took 2 years to get through that estate and a significant amount of attorney fees. And I remember being out there actually liquidating a business, and I'm just thinking to myself, man, with a little bit of planning, this really could have been a lot easier, both on the person who passed away, but on their beneficiaries. It would have been a lot more cost effective for sure, and been a lot faster. So hopefully that gives you, like I said, a brief overview on the difference between a will and a trust. You got to figure out which one's right for you. Talk to your estate planning attorney and figure out for your situation which is going to make sense. But the biggest difference again is just that probate, right? And so you run into time and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that's helpful, and good luck. Thanks.